Welcome to Dairy Pod, a podcast series from Dairy Australia. Featuring a range of experts, each episode offers insights into Australia's unique dairy farming conditions, as well as personal experiences and the latest in dairy innovation.
Welcome to Dairy Pod, and thanks for tuning in. In this episode, we will talk about soil nutrient management practices, what are the key principles to follow when applying fertilisers, and how to make the most of nutrients that we already have on the farm. My name is Libby Swayn, and I am an Extension Team Lead at Westvic Dairy, part of Dairy Australia, based in Camperdown in southwest Victoria. I'm sitting down with Cath Lescun, who is the National Soils and Water Lead at Dairy Australia, and Rachael Campbell from Agriculture Victoria, who is the Dairy Industry Development Officer. Welcome, Cath and Rachael, and thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Libby.
Before we get started, can you both please tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in the dairy industry? Starting with you, Cath.
Yeah, thanks, Libby. In my role as National Soils and Water Lead, I lead the Research, Development and Extension Program in the Soils and Water domain for Dairy Australia. And this domain covers soils and nutrients, effluent and irrigation. And my main role is to manage the research components within this domain. And I'm based at Southbank and have been with Dairy Australia for just over 8 years. But prior to joining Dairy Australia, I had very many field roles as agronomists and extensionists in commercial and government organisations.
Fantastic. Thanks, Cath. And Rachael, do you want to give us a little bit of background to you?
No worries, Libby. So I've worked for Agriculture Victoria and its predecessors for almost 20 years. I started in dairy research, trialling effluent application methods onto various pasture and crop species. And then I moved into dairy industry development, where I currently lead our industry innovation and modernisation group. A bit of what I do, I co-deliver with Dairy Australia the National Design Livestock Effluent Systems course. Along with that, I regularly talk to farmers and service provider groups across Australia on effluent system design, use and management. And along with that, I work with individual farmers, testing effluent and helping them maximise the use of the nutrients. Thanks, Libby.
Thanks, Cath and Rachael. It's fantastic to have both of your vast experience for our discussion today. So thank you. Cath, starting with you, can you tell us a little bit about what is actually soil and what do we really need to know about it?
Yeah, thanks, Libby. Yeah, soils are made up of 5 components, and those components are the minerals, the organic matter, the living organisms, air and water. And each of these and the proportions of these in a soil affect what the soil is like. I often think about a beach sand versus a soil where farming occurs, and these soils are obviously really, really different. And the difference is as a result of the proportions of the 5 different components, organic matter being a really important part of that component. And we often talk about the physical, chemical and biological properties of soils also. So many of these properties can be measured, and I think many farmers would be familiar with particularly the chemical properties that are measured within the soils.
So when we look at that, what are the key properties of a soil that are important for a productive dairy system?
Yeah. The key properties of soils are the biological, the physical and the chemical properties, as I've mentioned. But many properties of the soil can be measured, but routinely, and to help us with that productive dairy system, main properties measured would be maybe the chemical components consisting of the pH, the phosphorus, the potassium and the sulphur, the cations, electrical conductivity and dispersion. So these can be all done in a soil test and really give us a good indication of what we can do to achieve optimum productivity on our dairy farms.
So how do we measure that with the soil test? What do we do? How do we take that soil test? How do we go about that, Cath, to know what nutrients are in our soils? And why is it important to know this?
Yeah, it's a good question, Libby. And taking a soil test across your farm is the best way to understand the soils and nutrients that are on your farm. So many farms have got different textures of soil. So you might have a sandy loam area, but also quite a heavy loam at another point in your farm. So there are specific ways to take those soil tests. And in a pasture situation, we require a depth of 10 centimetres, and we want to take random samples across those representative areas that you're interested in. And as I mentioned, you might have different soil types. So those areas in your farm might be tested separately, or you might look at your paddock history and your management, or a mixture of your soil type and your management. And these areas can make up zones on your farm, and these are the sort of zonings or areas that you would soil test for or in. And it's important to be consistent in the timing of the soil sampling as well. So what we find is that in spring, where the moisture levels are quite consistent in the soil, and that's a really appropriate time to take soil tests. We'd also recommend for farmers that they take, after they've taken the soil test, that they send it to a lab which has got appropriate accreditation as well.
So we've taken our soil test, Cath, and then what next? What's the next bit? What do we get back from the lab?
Yeah. So what you get back from a lab is measurements of soil properties. Now, as I mentioned before, the chemical properties are the ones that we mostly measure or have done in the past. This may change into the future, but at the moment, the chemical properties are what we mostly measure, and that's what we use to look at what we can do to amend our soils. So those properties, the pH, the phosphorus, the potassium and the sulphur, are measured. And this information then can be used to plan your nutrient and amendment applications to your farming system. And so having the soil test data means that you can apply the right mix of nutrients onto the right paddocks in the right proportions with the right source and at the right time. So this makes good sense from an economic and production viewpoint, but it also from an environmental perspective. So what we can do is we'll know where and how much nutrients to apply, and this will, if this is done correctly and with a plan, it can lead to minimum losses of nutrients to the environment.
Great, thanks, Cath. And so is that the only thing we can do to test what's going on in our soil and the nutrient levels that might be required for plant growth?
We can also test plant tissue for analysis. Now, plant tissue tests are generally done to determine what the requirement is for trace elements or our microelements. And now these microelements include copper, zinc, molybdenum, particularly boron as well. And their critical concentrations will differ for different plants. But so we generally will do those tests in the spring as well. And like the soil tests, we need to make sure that they are a representative sample of any area that we want to test and get that information for.
Excellent. And Cath, are generally farmers good at soil testing? Do we have lots of farmers uptake soil testing?
Yeah, Dairy Australia has this information via surveys that we conduct every 3 years in terms of the land, the water and the climate themes. So Dairy Australia does conduct quite a few surveys, but within that land, water, climate survey, we do gather information around how many dairy farmers are soil testing and how many dairy farmers are planning their nutrient applications and how many are doing tissue tests. Now, what we find is that 9 out of 10 farms do soil tests. So in 2023, that's a great result. 90% of our farmers are soil testing. This only translates to about 60% of our farmers that are doing nutrient plans or budgets. And so there are some, it seems that some are soil testing without actually following up and using those soil tests to their fullest. And we only have about 23 of farmers tissue testing. Now, you don't need to tissue test every year or even every couple of years, but really good to determine whether you need trace elements or not in your system.
Yeah, really interesting, Cath. So if we've got our soil test back and now we've had a look at it, how do we know what levels that those nutrients should be within our soils?
Yeah, what farmers will see on their soil test reports that they get back, particularly if they go to an appropriately accredited lab, is that they will get that indicative critical concentration level for each of the soil properties that are measured. So when I'm talking about a soil property, if I'm talking about phosphorus, there will be on that soil test report an indicative level, which will be the critical concentration or a range of that critical concentration required for that soil type. And these levels have been developed by research looking at the plant production, and it's the soil test level where 95% of our maximum plant growth was obtained. So these levels are different for each nutrient. So the phosphorus level will be very different to the potassium level, which will be different to the sulphur level. And obviously pH is another measure as well. And again, what really it's important for farmers to understand too is that different tests provide a different critical concentration as well. And the very typical one there is phosphorus tests. We have 2 phosphorus tests that we use. One's an Olsen and one's a Colwell. And the critical concentration, depending on that test, will be different. But ideally, when we're using those critical concentrations and our soil test reports, we'd actually get a professional to provide advice and to interpret and develop a plan to apply the nutrients. As soil textures and individual farmer goals influence the applications required.
Yeah, great advice, Cath. And if the nutrient levels are too low or too high, what's some of the things we can do to address those issues, and how do we approach it from the whole farm point of view?
Yeah, if the nutrients are too low or too high, we can apply amendments or nutrients to correct those nutrient deficiencies or correct the pH levels. So lime, and many farmers will understand, lime's used to correct low pH, so to increase that pH level. Or gypsum is used on sodic soils to add calcium and to allay dispersion. But nutrient applications we can do to address our phosphorus, potassium, sulphur levels, and these applications can be by way of inorganic fertiliser products or organic products such as composts or effluent. And Libby, I'd emphasise here that having a soil test conducted and a whole farm nutrient management plan developed will ensure that the nutrient products and amendments are put on in the right place at the right time and at the right rate with the right source of product.
I think this is a really good point. It's a point to bring Rachael in. So Cath's obviously talked about some of the soil nutrient requirements of our soil, but on farm we'll have some nutrients available to us that are free pretty much through our effluent ponds. We've already paid for those, Rachael. So that can be seen as a resource. Can you tell us a bit about the nutrients that are in effluent and how we're able to find out what's actually in the effluent that we have?
Thanks, Libby. Yeah, you're exactly right. Dairy effluent is a valuable source of nutrients that can replace some of your bought-in fertiliser needs. In saying that, it's not a balanced fertiliser, so it's really important to acknowledge that. So generally, dairy effluent has the highest concentration of potassium. Usually that's followed by nitrogen, but occasionally that can flip. It then has lower but still useful amounts of phosphorus and sulphur. Along with that, micronutrients such as calcium and magnesium. One thing to note, it can be quite salty, so that needs to be considered, and when you're applying, make sure you rotate the application areas. The best way to think about the nutrients in effluent are for sludge and solids. A lot of those nutrients are in slow release forms, so will be available over time. Whereas liquid effluent from a well-maintained storage pond will be mostly readily plant available nutrients. So as soon as they're applied, they'll be available to the plants. How we actually know what nutrients we're applying from the effluent, it's a really good idea to test effluent prior to application. Have a chat to your agronomist about that. They can help you out. It's not a difficult task, and it really gives you useful information that you can then use to with your agronomist to work out appropriate application rates. So as I said, usually phosphorus is in the highest proportion in that liquid effluent. So it's important to follow principles like the FertSmart principles with no more than 60 kilos of potassium per application and up to 120 per year to reduce that risk of runoff. So obviously best idea is to test the effluent on your farm because it will vary from farm to farm. But if you can't do this, there is book values available online. Just be mindful they are averages, so the nutrients in the effluent that you're going to apply may be less than the average or maybe substantially above. The next point is nutrients are there. You're applying them when you're applying the effluent, so don't forget to incorporate that in your whole farm nutrient budget. And there's a whole heap of resources available on both the Agriculture Victoria and the Dairy Australia websites to help you with that.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great, Rachel. Thank you. So when it comes to the practical application of effluent, how and when should farmers go about doing it?
Great. Thanks, Libby. So how often a pond should be emptied really varies, and it depends on how the effluent system was designed. The role of effluent ponds are to store effluent when the conditions aren't suitable for it to be applied, and so you can utilise those nutrients strategically at times when it is appropriate to apply them to paddocks. So on the design part of it, that's really based on your herd size, your catchment areas, other infrastructure flowing into the effluent system, your needs, and how the effluent management system and how often you want to and are able to empty it, and how that fits in with other jobs on the farm. One thing to note, effluent ponds shouldn't be allowed to overflow. That's a really important point, and that's not managing the effluent system and can cause obvious significant problems. So just on that, a freeboard on effluent ponds, which is the top part of the pond, which is not full, it's an important thing to have on your ponds at all times, and that's for many reasons. It's a good safety buffer when if there's large rainfall events, and also it's important to make sure that so you don't have too much wave action on the top of the pond that can cause issues with the pond banks. And then moving on to effluent application, that varies widely. Simple systems from travelling irrigators, fixed sprinklers, through to shandying into your irrigation system through pivots and that type of thing. With different equipment, effluent to apply sludge and solids are generally more expensive, and you really need to work out whether it's useful for you to own that equipment or to use a contractor who has that equipment. And generally, desludging your ponds, you won't have to do that as often as utilising liquid effluent. That liquid effluent is generally easier to apply. So having your own equipment to do that, such as a travelling irrigator, is a good way to manage that. And all these systems have their own pros and cons, and certainly do your research before you go and buy equipment. And if you're designing a new system, consider how you're going to apply the effluent, so you can design the system to utilise that equipment.
Yeah, sounds like a great idea, Rachel. What about where we're going to put that effluent? What can we use it for?
Definitely. Those sludge and solids have a lot of slow release nutrients in them, so they're really good when you're renovating paddocks. So that's a good way of utilising that. Liquid effluent, it's good on pasture and crops, and especially that liquid effluent, due to its high levels of potassium and nitrogen, it's really good on silage regrowth to put back some of those nutrients onto the paddocks. The other thing to consider is liquid effluent has water in it, so that's really handy in the drier periods and can increase that shoulder growing season as well.
Yeah, of course. And is there paddocks we should avoid?
Most definitely. Effluent can be high in nutrients, so we really need to consider that. So areas we should avoid are paddocks that are already high in nutrients, which you would have hopefully worked out from your soil testing program. Other areas are calf rearing areas. It's a good idea to avoid those. In terms of withholding periods after effluent application, generally for liquid effluent, it's at least 21 days For sludge and solid application, it can be up to 6 weeks, and that's a little bit dependent. We really want to see grass growth after the application and not be able to still see the material that you've applied. And it's worth checking with holds with your milk company just in case they have their own requirements. And in terms of grazing following application, definitely avoid grazing sensitive livestock classes due to the high nutrient levels you potentially are applying. So Springer cattle and calves are the two to be really careful with. And the last few points on that, regularly rotating the effluent application areas, you'll get your biggest bang for buck. And then following effluent application, make sure you soil test to see what the nutrient application has achieved.
Yeah, so again, going back to Cath's point on soil testing, being regular soil testing is obviously important. But is there other things that our listeners should be aware of in terms of nutrient and effluent management, Rachel?
Yes, Libby, it is important that farmers comply with their state's environmental requirements, as well as any local area requirements and any milk company requirements. It's important that they have appropriate effluent systems for their farm that are designed specifically for their farm and their needs, that these systems are monitored frequently and actively managed. With the design, it is important, as I said, that it's for that farm. And the other thing is design the system for the maximum herd size that you think the farm will milk rather than what they are currently milking, because we know herd creep happens, and that's often an area where which puts pressure on the effluent system and can cause issues into the future. We have those nutrients, as I've explained, that are sitting there in the pond, so utilising them is a great idea. It can save you some money, and applying that regularly is a really good strategy for a few reasons. It's going to help with that compliance by maintaining a suitable storage levels. And it's also a really good management strategy for minimising greenhouse gas emissions. And talking about effluent system design and appropriate designs, you can seek advice from effluent system designers who are available across Australia as well.
And the other thing that we probably need to consider is environmental consequences of not getting it right, and what that means for farmers. What's the environmental considerations we need to take into consideration?
Yes, definitely. So as we've established, effluent is a good source of nutrients. We want to utilise those nutrients on farm, not let them leave the farm. So it's really important to identify those sensitive areas such as waterways, drainage lines, dams, neighbours, that type of thing, and then leave buffer zones when applying effluent. It's important you do that, and if you have a contractor come in to apply effluent, have a chat with them and make sure they leave buffer zones too between the effluent application and the sensitive area. You've paid for those nutrients coming in the gate in grain. They're sitting in the effluent pond. Make best use of those and don't let them leave the farm. The other thing is to make sure you're applying effluent in suitable conditions. So we really want to avoid applying to already waterlogged paddocks, as I said previously, to paddocks that already have high levels of nutrients. And the other thing is if there's strong winds, that can obviously have an odour issue that can cause concern.
Yeah, of course. And the other aspect I would have thought that's really important around effluent ponds, but probably with all nutrient management programs, is the safety aspect to farmers as well. So can you mention about that as well, actually?
Definitely. So effluent ponds and effluent systems in general can be dangerous. The ponds are often deep. Sometimes it's hard to see where the edge of the ponds are. So it's really important to regularly maintain around the ponds so people can clearly see where the edge of those ponds are. Make sure you have procedures in place so that people aren't unnecessarily going near the ponds. Other areas within the effluent system that it's important to consider from a safety perspective are traffical solids traps, pumps, any floating pontoons, that type of thing. So go away and have a think about the effluent system, the whole system, whether there's areas that there could be improvement on your farm from a safety perspective. Thanks, Libby.
Yeah, no, thanks, Rachel. Really, really critical points. Cath, I'm going to throw back to you for a final question. Are you able to tell us about the events that Dairy Australia is organising for early next year on soil health?
Yeah, I'd love to, Libby. Dairy Australia have got a project team working on an event which is called Grounds for Growth, and it's about soil and pasture biodiversity. And it's really the inaugural Soils and Pasture Biodiversity Farmer event. What we're trying to do is to really provide good support to farmers so that they can make informed decisions around adopting and implementing practices that promote soil health and function, and doing that, adopting those practices whilst maintaining their productivity. And these on-farm practices, they might be looking at increasing climate resilience as well as reducing environmental impact, which we've talked a bit about just this afternoon, and also reducing that reliance on external inputs. And Rachel's just highlighted how we can use effluent to as one way of reducing those external inputs. So it's going to be a 3-day event. It will be held in Warrnambool between the 4th and the 6th of March. And we're hoping we'll provide farmers with current information on the benefits and challenges of adopting soil and pasture systems to improve their soil health. And the event is going to be, it's for farmers by farmers. We've had a lot of input from a farmer advisory group as well as a technical advisory group. And we're combining the science of multi-species pastures and other practices which impact on that soil function with the practical experiences of farmers adopting multi-species particularly. So we're really excited about this event. It is going to be 3 fantastic days. We've got 1 day of tour and 2 days in a seminar forum style event. So there'll be information on the Dairy Australia website. So if anybody wants further information, go to our website, look up Grounds for Growth, and hope to see lots and lots of farmers there in Warrnambool between the 4th and the 6th of March.
Sounds fantastic, Cath, and we will look forward to attending that. That's great. I'd like to thank you both for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you and drawing on your expertise. If you want to find more out about nutrient management, effluent management, or about the Grounds for Growth conference, I encourage you to visit the Dairy Australia website or the Agriculture Victoria websites, or contact your local Dairy Australia representative for more information. Thank you, and we look forward to catching up with you on the next episode of the Dairy Pod.
Thanks, Libby.
Thank you, Libby.
Thank you for joining today's Dairy Pod episode. We hope you found it enjoyable and insightful. For more information, check out the episode notes. You can stay up to date by following Dairy Pod on your favourite podcast platform. To get in touch, visit dairyaustralia.com.au. Until next time, take care.